my dad would tell us, like, I wore my first pair of shoes going to secondary school.
My
right?
dad too,
Exactly.
age 15, 16,
yes,
the
exactly.
same. Did
Yeah.
not have shoes.
Yes.
Do we have the same dad?
I know. We'll find out.
Salam everyone, and welcome to Salam and Hello. I'm Lily Bakala Piper, and so happy that you've made time to be with us today. As many of you know, Kenya, Ethiopia, Somalia, and many countries in the region are currently in the worst drought of 40 years. The rains have failed, and once again, we are thinking and working towards solutions for millions of families around the region affected by the drought. But it's one thing to think about drought and food insecurity when there is a crisis like we're in right now. It's another thing to be working towards those solutions year-round, 365, 24/7, even when there's not a crisis. Today's guest, Wawira Njiru, the founder, executive director, and all hands on deck of Food for Education, is with us to talk about the ways that her and her team are addressing food insecurity here in Kenya. Food for Education last year served their 10 millionth meal to children in school in Kenya. 10 million. Just let that number sink in for a minute. Currently, they feed 95,000 kids a day a meal at school. It's extraordinary the work that they're doing. And the work that they're doing supersedes the drought. It came before a crisis happened, which is why I think it's the kind of development work that we need more of. Work that is grassroots, work that is authentic, work that is born out of a simple desire to meet a need at home. So I could not be more delighted or more proud to welcome Wawira to the show today. She has won all kinds of awards. You've probably heard and seen her on social media and on the news. And I think it's worth noting because she is one of our own. And when we get a chance to give someone their flowers, we must do it. So let me just highlight some of the ways that the world has stopped and recognized her contributions. In 2018, she won the Global Citizen Prize for Youth Leadership, the first time ever that award was given. She was presented it at the Global Citizen Festival in Johannesburg, which was honoring Nelson Mandela's 100th birthday. Last year, or actually it's been 2 years now, we're in 2023. In 2021, she was Kenya's United Nations Person of the Year. And in 2022, she was awarded the Icon Award from the World's 50 Best Restaurants program. Extraordinary acknowledgments for her extraordinary efforts to feed children in school. Food for Education is an organization you need to know about. And so I am just delighted that Wawira joined us today before she hits the road on basically a world tour of sharing her work and doing her work. And before she did that, she joined us here today in Nairobi. So karibu, Wawira. I'm just so honored that you're with us today.
Thanks for having me. Thank you. This is very exciting.
Thank you so much for being here. So I've given a few highlights of the work that you're doing, but for those who are not fluent in the work that you've been doing and the 10 million meals that Food for Education has served, just give us a little bit of what you do and why you started this organization.
Yeah, sure. So Food for Education started when around 10 years ago now, and was a passion project for a couple of years because I was 21 years old. And it was really just a response to kids in the city, like little town I grew up in called Ruiru, saying, they're hungry in school. And I was doing my undergrad in nutrition then. And I sent my parents to the public schools and I said, I want to do something about kids having good education and enabling them to have good education. And maybe I can raise some money in Australia through friends. And they went to the schools to find out what the biggest problem was. And the schools, 4 of the schools that they went to, I think at the time, all of them said that school feeding was the biggest issue. So really it was born to respond to something. It wasn't a preconceived, this is what children actually need. Obviously children need food, but I wasn't as aware of it as a big problem as when it was made a big problem by the teachers and them saying that this is the biggest problem because you could do anything in education. Absolutely. You could give kids digital tools and things like that. So I raised some money in Australia, and then I started feeding kids, 25 children, build a makeshift kitchen. And what I'd do, I'd just send the money back home, and the kids would get fed. So it started off really small, and it remained like that for about 4 or 5 years. Yeah.
When you say really small for 4 or 5 years, 25 kids per year, kind of small.
25 per day. So
Okay.
it was just 25 kids would come for lunch every day.
Okay.
It got up to around 50.
Okay.
So that was a time, I was still in Australia. I was doing my undergrad. I moved back, figuring out what I want to do, try to get a job. You're kind of like enrolled in
A
a
real job.
master's, a real job, enrolled in a master's degree, and then decided that I didn't want to do any of it. So that kind of thinking through took about 4 to 5 years plus finishing my degree. Yeah.
I'm actually glad for you to say that, the 4 to 5 year part. I think so many of us are looking for that quick fix.
Yeah.
For young people who are listening today, they're going to feel like, they need to go out there and do it right away. But I appreciate that you let something kind of simmer for a time. When was the next big leap? When did that start to scale up a bit more?
Yeah, so I remember around 2015, I started thinking, this can be like, what should I be doing? Should I work on this full time? Should I do something more, scale this? Because the need was big. So whether you're feeding 50 children, teachers would come and say, can you expand? Can you feed 100? And I say, I don't have money to do that. Like, I'm raising money to
How were
only
you funding
feed
it up to
50
that point?
through friends. So
Okay.
it was just, I'd do Facebook campaigns, I would message. We had some few monthly donations. So it was small enough to sort of sustain through the network of people I knew at the time, especially those in Australia who would become friends. So when I lived there, I did like some speaking engagements in churches and things like that. So it was just basically small but very meaningful contributions from people to be able to sustain the work as it was. And so in 2015, 2016, the need is huge. You just keep getting the same requests. Oddly, it's never stopped. Like the requests have never stopped. But kind of like trying to figure out what should I do? What should I do about this? I have this thing. It's either you get to a point where it's either you kind of go on it full time, or you figure out what does really doing it look like, or you sort of let it continue to be a small thing and a passion project, and you find like a real job. There's a lot of pressure also from my parents because I've just come back with this degree, and they're just like, well, you're living at home, what are you doing? So I had to really figure out what I wanted to do. Yeah.
And what made you decide to do it?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things was that I remember we hosted a fundraiser once, and there's this person who donated 250,000 shillings. It was just an event, and they donated, not many people came, but they donated 250,000 shillings. His name is actually Kev Mulay. He's Kenyan. And I couldn't believe someone gave us 250,000 shillings. I was just like, for this? Like, why would you it was so much money, right?
Yeah,
and I was just like,
huge.
how can you give 250,000 shillings to this? And I was like, can this be a real thing? And so it wasn't that we had, I mean, people used to give like $1,000 or something like that. But I think it was like one of the biggest gifts we'd ever received at the time. But also that a Kenyan had done it. And it was like, you kind of feel like, wow, this is something I can do. This is something that can be done, that should be done. So that was one of the things that helped kind of push me in that direction of figuring out how can this be full time. The other thing was finding a model that I thought could be interesting, the central kitchen model. So at that time, we were still like feeding around 50 children. And they were all coming to this little kitchen and eating there that was near one of the schools. And so one of the biggest questions I had is, if we went to other schools, how would we do it? So I found a model on YouTube actually in India that feeds 1.8 million children. And that organization is incredible. We've actually become partner organizations over the years. But like watching their YouTube videos just made me think, wait, what if we had a central kitchen and then we distributed food to schools? So that's really like something, finding a model and finding like traction towards fundraising was some of, I think, two of the key things that made me feel like maybe I could do this. And so how I took the leap was just started to kind of, I mean, I used to talk about it all the time to everyone to raise money, but then started like applying for grants, got a lot of rejections, but just kept going and said, this is what I want to do. I want to give it a shot. Of course, like my parents were like, you shouldn't do this full time. You should find other things. They were like, I know this person who can give you a job at this place or this
Of
place.
course.
I worked 3 months at Unilever, trying to be like, this is the perfect food science and
Yeah.
nutrition job. And then I was just, the first grant we got, which is around like early 2017 or 2016, I don't remember well. That was a time I was like, oh wow, now we can actually do this. Yeah.
So let me ask you a little bit. I want to dial back to your parents a little bit because you've talked about in other places where I've read your story that your parents themselves when they were growing up did not have a lot of means.
Yeah.
That they worked really hard to put you and your sisters through school to provide for you to make sure you had solid education. And I have a similar story. My parents grew up very poor, and my dad often we would laugh. He'd say, if they had a meal a day, if they had 2 meals a day, like how lucky the days were when they had two, because most of the time it was just one meal a day growing up in very rural Ethiopia. Tell me kind of how that living with the story of your parents and kind of what they went through, and then yourself having the opportunities that you did, how you marry those two in inspiring your work and carrying it forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think for many people, like you shared, that grow up in our African household, you always hear the story of like, like my dad would tell us, like I wore my first pair of shoes going to secondary school,
My dad
right?
too, age
Exactly.
15,
Yes,
16, the same,
exactly.
did not
Yeah.
have shoes. Do we
Yes.
have the same dad?
I know. We'll find out.
We might.
Yeah. And so, having that and then having like, when if they'd get food because they were farmers, subsistence farmers, if they had food, they'd have to share it. He had 7 siblings, they'd have to share it,
Yes.
and so each person eats a little bit. And he used to go hungry. And my mom also, she grew up more urban poor, so she grew up in the slums, also had the same sort of insecurity around education and around food. But for both of them, they actually met in college, and for both of them, their parents and their families had struggled so much to put them through education. So I grew up with a really big framing of like education is so powerful because that's how we're able to feed you guys, we're able to kind of have a home and things like that.
Absolutely.
So when I started trying to make an intervention in schools, the education piece was sort of the priority. I wanted to give kids the ability to learn better, the same way my parents had been given. It just happened that the biggest problem they had and they continue to have is food, and that was affecting their ability to learn and stay in school.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's thank you for sharing that. It's really kind of beautiful to hear you tell that story because one of the things I've been thinking about is over the 10 years that Food for Education has grown, how much you have to tell this story. I've worked in development myself for a long time, but not in the role that you've been, which is, kind of sharing the story, having to raise funds and telling that story with dignity and with the joy that you have for the work that you do. I just want to talk about that for just a quick moment. How do you tell that story, Wawira? 10 years on, I'm so struck by how young you are. So just truly from my heart, well done to you. You make me so proud. I could just cry, honestly, thinking about all that you've done. But how do you tell that story in a way that continues to honor your parents, continues to honor this place that we love? And yet, you have to tell a hard story about poverty and its how insidious it is. It's not glamorous. And yet there's so much joy in the story of our parents' upbringing, and we take pride in their strength.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the storytelling that's involved in your work.
Yeah. I think that, one of the conscious things that we've done is we don't show, for example, hungry children. So you show children,
Thank you for that.
after, like when they're happy, even if they're in a lunch line waiting for food, you ask them, after, because we get consent for the photos, like, can you smile for the photo? Not, so sad, they're so hungry. And so I think that the stories of my parents, the stories of my life, is a story of really opportunity and how powerful giving someone an opportunity is. And that's what I feel like my parents, like my mom was got a random stranger to sponsor her through high school. And that is the reason why she was able to finish high school. So it's not that they were so poor they couldn't afford high school, but what a great thing that, someone sponsored her to finish high school. And so when I view my work and I view the story of my work, it's a story of like giving people opportunities to sort of, and children in particular, to improve their lives. And that is only a happy story. So when you give someone an opportunity, it's not like, here's an opportunity, let's cry. It's like, wow, yeah,
Absolutely.
let's be happy. So and I think that that's something that I think when I look at the work and I look at the storytelling that's involved, sometimes, you kind of, people have the expectation that you're going to tell the sad story, but the more you find that you tell the story through a joyous lens, I find that people relate more to that. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. I just reminds me of one of my life mantras, which is talent is universal, but opportunity is not.
Yeah.
And so through that joyous story, you're bringing more justice to the communities and the places that you love, which is what all of us can do. I mean, you are so young again. You started this work when you were so young. You took a need, you looked at it, you asked the people who were there, the teachers, the students, what do you need most? We need food. And so you addressed that need, and it's making such a huge difference now. So let's talk a little bit about how Food for Education has grown. So you make this big leap, you invest, you start to scale it, the work really starts to grow. In 2018, you win this Global Citizen Prize, and you start to include a bit more technology into the work that you're doing. Tell us about how you're using technology and local markets to kind of scale the work that you're doing.
Yeah, so in around 2018, when we won the Global Citizen Prize, we were feeding around 2,000, 3,000 children. And one of the key things that we had, so that we introduced in around 2017, was that parents would contribute for the meals. And that was also a conversation with parents, understanding like how much they were spending on lunch and how much they would likely want to contribute they could afford, and made it like a survey of, the sort of a wide scale of parents understanding the income levels and understanding how much they could afford. And they said they could afford 15 shillings. And that's what they were typically spending for, what they were buying for their kids, which is like, a drink and like a mandazi or something like that. And so we said, what if we could offer you a full lunch at that price? So when we introduced that in around, I think it's, my years are mixed up, 2016, 17, we collected that 15 shillings as cash. So the kids would bring the money to school. Sometimes, they'd need change, or it would get stolen. There were just like so many issues. And so what we needed to figure out was a way to collect that money to allow parents to contribute, because I really believe in, first of all, like I was like, I'm not rich, I can't feed all these kids for free. They need to help in terms of covering the cost, but also I feel like there is a dignity in involving people and saying, I see what you have and I can find value in that and I can give you value for that. And so the technology was developed as a payment system. So first of all, I am not a technology person, so I knew nothing about technology. However, I knew about bus tickets and metro cards. And what metro cards were interesting to me was that how fast everyone got on the train and really like just got on the train really like it's rush hour, you're getting in like a metro card or something like that. So I said to like our team then and said, what if we had a metro card but for food, but topped up with M-Pesa? And everyone was like, that's weird and that's not realistic. And so it took us a while to find, because we didn't have a tech team, so to find like an outsourced partner, a company we could work with who actually understood the vision. We went to different companies that had different solutions, and there are so many like hurdles of like to be used by children, so not adults, to be topped up through
because your kids these are primary school kids,
yes,
right?
primary school
from 5, 6
yes,
to
even 3, because it starts at kindergarten.
Okay.
So to be used by very small children, and older children, but then still children who don't have phones, and their parents have ways to understand how their children are eating, and then to be very fast. So because one of the biggest challenges we had was the speed of like the cash someone would bring, then you need change, and then it's like a whole
Of course,
thing.
yeah.
So it needed to be really fast. So when we were feeding around 3,000 children, we won the Global Citizen Prize. It was just an idea then. We're so lucky that they took the chance. Actually, the prize is open right now for anyone who wants to apply. The application process, anyone who wants to apply. Still $250,000, which was really significant for us. Is still significant. And so when they gave us the prize, the first thing was to figure out how to do it. And so then we introduced NFC payments, so mobile payments that are linked to NFC. So essentially,
what's NFC?
NFC is like your credit card technology.
Okay.
So you can just tap the same way you tap at you can tap at a grocery store.
Okay.
So we needed to tweak a little bit, so that I don't go into too much detail, but we needed to tweak it a little bit where it doesn't have, like, if you tap your credit card, you have to put in the PIN. So children don't have, a PIN. They can't remember. So it needs to be very seamless for them. So we developed that as a way to enable kids to eat more. And in a year, we moved from like 3,000 to 10,000 children because of that technology, because of how seamless. So a parent just goes, registers on a USSD, which is star something something hash, and then they top up, and then they consistently top up however much they want to top up. So there's no limit in how much you want to top up, and their kids just withdraw that when they come to school.
And they wear like a bracelet, I think.
Yeah, and they wear the bracelets, yes.
And they just tap that every time they get to school with your team who's there delivering the food.
Yes, exactly. And so that has enabled us to scale massively, because it enables us to kind of have a very rich data set of like how we're providing meals, to have correct predictions, and to have really low wastage. So our wastage is under 2%.
Incredible.
Just because of our ability to sort of make sure that we're serving meals consistently, but also we're predicting the amounts very well. And then from a sourcing perspective, we're now expanding our technology to enable us to source better and to be able to work with a wider range of farmers and suppliers.
And you're working with farmers and suppliers in Kenya?
Yes, in Kenya and the region.
Yeah. Tell us where Food for Education is working right now. You started in your hometown, is that right?
In Njiru,
And tell us where you are now.
Yeah, so we started in Njiru, now we're in Juja, which is another town, Kiambu, in Kisumu, in Mombasa, and we're in Nairobi. And Murang'a. I always forget Murang'a because it's newer.
Yeah, Moranga's close to my heart. Around the corner.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, my daughter started a menstrual health program there in 2015.
Nice.
So we've been going to Murang'a since then. And definitely
it's very beautiful.
A community that's beautiful. Beautiful. Those beautiful farms. Yeah, absolutely. So you're scaling, you're growing. Tell me what it means. I think I can't remember what year either. Now, maybe it's 2019 or so. You hit this 1 million meal mark. What did that milestone mean to you?
It meant a lot because, when I started Food for Education, the goal was to start with 25 and get to 100 kids.
Imagine.
Yeah, so it was just like, this is my really big, hairy, ambitious goal. Is to get to 100 kids. Yeah, 100 kids. And so getting to 1 million in 2019, it felt really good. It felt like it's, it made a huge difference and it felt good. But it also felt hard because I feel like a lot of times people accomplish goals and the number is great, but then the effort that it's taken to get to that number is actually also significant, and a lot of failures, a lot of rejections, a lot of mistakes, a lot of things that I had to learn from really quickly. And so it felt good and it felt hard, but that's the journey. Yeah.
So I didn't ask you this ahead of time, or I didn't prep you for this question, but I hope you don't mind maybe sharing what some of those failures or mistakes are. If there are other young people who are, or old people like myself, who are thinking about, change and grassroots movements and how to make an impact. What did you learn that didn't work, or what did you learn from those mistakes along the way?
So first of all, I'm gonna quote Rihanna and be like, never
Okay.
a failure, always a lesson. Because I always think that, like, I mean, it's failures because you're just like, shit,
That's okay, girl.
I
It's okay.
shouldn't
We
have
put it
done
right.
that.
I like it. You gave us a more edgy feel to our podcast.
I shouldn't have done that. But when you think about it, like 6 months down the line, you say, oh, wow, I learned so much from that. So that's,
Yeah. Yeah. So give us an example.
yeah. So one of the things actually is, so in 2000, I'll get my years wrong, but at the beginning, like maybe 2 or 3 years after the 2012, I've started a food delivery business, and the food delivery business was supposed to raise funds to cover the meals that we were distributing. And it was a great business. It was called Double Portion, and I put a lot of effort into like setting it up. So first it started as a restaurant in Riru, ran a restaurant, learned a ton about running a restaurant, which is very tough. And then became a delivery business. So I literally used to deliver the meals, got bodas, and learned a lot about managing bodas and that kind of like fleet of production. But the meals were different because it's for like people in their offices. So the meals are not the same meals that you're cooking for kids. They're sort of more boutique type meals. And so we ran that for a couple of years and closed it in 2018. And the reason why we closed it was actually closed it in the month of the highest revenue because we'd been running this business for many years. And then I remember someone told me, like, you should just do an analysis of how much money you would make from this business at scale. So if it grew to the wildest dreams of like the market size, so don't make up a market that doesn't exist. So if all the office people, let's say in Nairobi, however many they are, ordered from you and who can afford this price point, it was around like maybe 250 shillings. If all of them ordered, how much money would you make, and how many meals from kids would you subsidize? So we did that analysis, and the number was 40,000 meals for kids. But the goal in my head, though we were at around 2,000, 3,000, I was like, and it's always been the goal is 1 million kids a day. So the question I had to ask myself is like, would I put an effort in something that feeds 40,000, yet the goal is 1 million? So it doesn't really make sense because then
the numbers didn't add up.
Exactly. Yeah. So I had to make a decision to close down the business because I felt like it didn't really, even at its fullest potential, and growing a business is tough. So there would be a lot of effort that it needed to get to that level of subsidizing 40,000 meals. And so the question was, can you do both, or should you just focus on the feeding kids and try to make it as efficient and as cheap and scale it as fast as possible? So decided to close that business. And I think when I look back, like that was one of the hardest decisions I had to make because not many people understood. And, also talking to a team that had put in a lot of effort and saying like, you have to be redundant, and doing that whole entire process. That wasn't easy. So, yeah.
But now for education itself, I mean, you have a pretty big team.
Yeah.
Tell us, you have around 200 staff who are now working?
No, we have 700.
So 700?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Okay. The numbers are just extraordinary.
They change all the time.
Yeah, they change all the time. We were talking about this kind of before we got on air that you're now feeding about 95,000 kids a day and growing.
Yeah.
Numbers growing. 700 staff. You have these kitchens. I read that you cook mostly at night, so that that's, of course, they have to deliver to the kids during the day, early in the morning, get to the schools on time, because now you're delivering to the schools that you mentioned earlier where you are. The goal is 1 million kids a day is what you're aiming to. What's it going to take, do you think, to get to that number?
A lot of hard work. And so right now, like next year, we are, which is this year.
Yeah, 2023.
We're looking at moving from 95 to around, conservatively around 200,000 kids. So doubling, just over doubling this year. And so it's going to take, a lot of setting up more kitchens. And now we're going more into working with governments, so county governments, and constituency governments and the national government to provide meals across the country. So we're just signed a partnership with Mombasa County, for example. And we're signing one with other counties, with two other counties to deliver meals across the country, and so across those counties, and eventually the goal is to get more around the country. So it's going to take, setting up more infrastructure, setting up bigger teams, and it's ensuring that we're able to cook and produce and distribute those meals, and then also more partnerships across the country. Yeah.
So let's talk about that. As you're scaling, as you're growing, while you're doing that, we're also in the context of this heartbreaking drought, of inflation that is higher than we've seen in years. We're facing food crisis just from the war in Ukraine that has just devastated some of the markets here. How is that affecting your business? Not to mention that we're not even out of COVID really, but during COVID you also had to pivot. So talk about how you, as an organization that is meeting a humanitarian need, can continue to function in the middle of other crises that are happening, around you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that's usually challenging for us is, when you're working in the food space and the needs are growing, so there's inflation, there's the drought, there's a lot of tension to expand and to kind of like move to other regions, because the demand becomes higher in terms of, people in this region are facing a specific drought, and there's need to provide to that. And so, and also with inflation has really affected our food prices. So, we've seen, like, let's say maize prices
Right.
almost double, because of the current, oil prices, the way the supply of the country is in terms of low supply within the country, because of the drought, and then also because of the war in Ukraine and the inflation across the world. And so, it's driven up our cost per meal. So we monitor closely our cost per meal. And also, ingredients like, let's say, rice at some point was like 75% higher than we'd buy it for. Maize is one of the most significant increases, which affects everyone in the country. And so that means that there's a lot of more pressure on us, because the meals that we provide are subsidized. So the parents are only contributing 15 shillings, but we subsidize the cost of that meal. So if the cost of food is higher, it means our subsidy must be higher, because we don't want to push that cost of the increase to parents who are also struggling.
Of course.
Yeah, because of inflation. Like, if it's harder for us to provide the meals, it's harder for them to provide meals to their kids.
Of course.
And so navigating how to manage those costs and how to kind of make sure that we are efficiently set up. So we've invested in warehousing, we've invested in better supply chain systems, so that we can buy in bulk when cheap food is really cheap. But then even navigating cheap is not like, someone's not going to come and say rice is cheap today. It's going to go it's going to go higher tomorrow. So you constantly have to have your ear on the ground and monitor and kind of really build out a team that is able to buy at the right time. Yeah.
What do parents pay now for the meals?
15 shillings.
Still 15
Still
shillings.
15 shillings, yeah.
I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, God bless you for that. That's extraordinary that they're still paying that 15,000 even in the midst of all these pressures on you to as you're scaling and the crisis around you. So as we just kind of wind up, as we think about the story of this grassroots movement, one of the things that strikes me about living in Kenya as an Ethiopian is just it's such a dynamic space. Nairobi, there's so many things happening between tech and art, and it's just there's always something, and that includes the social impact space. So tell me, what do you think you and your fellow humanitarians and activists, what do you have to teach others in the region? I think there's so much happening that's right that we don't always focus on. There's so much. It's easy to see what's going wrong. But I'd love to hear from you. What are you learning? What are you seeing that you think Kenya might have to offer the world on what's going well in the grassroots social movement space?
Yeah, I think that some of the things I've seen is like there's a lot of innovation on how to solve problems in Kenya and across the continent. I remember there was an organization that someone was telling me has primarily worked on the continent, is providing mental health services and is now moving into the US to provide mental health services. So that's the opposite of what we expect development to look like, is that, it comes from the US to here. But now we're developing innovations, and we've had, a lot of requests of, can you bring this to our country, mostly around the continent, but even across the world, especially through our technology and through other systems that we've developed to be able to become more efficient. I think also what I would, tell people who are sort of starting out, or what I've seen social entrepreneurs as, is there's so many incredible women and so many incredible people who are from Kenya who are developing solutions for Kenya. So there's a lot of people who, like Charlotte from Mukuru Stores, who just won the Outshot Prize. There's Nelly, who just won CNN Heroes for her work providing technology services to kids. And so there is a lot of innovation, and it's being recognized across the world. But also, it's not starting from like, I want to start an idea so that I win this prize. It's starting from, I saw a need. If you hear their stories, if you hear a lot of people, it's, I saw the need. It was in my community or in the place that I was living in. And I thought, why don't I try and solve that? So I think that for a lot of people who are thinking, should I do something? I think, for me, it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to start an organization that will feed 1 million children. That happened, the dream started formalizing as I was doing it. But the first thing was like, well, I have money to feed. I can raise money. I didn't even have it myself. I can hustle my friends to raise money to feed 25 children. And so that's the need I'm going to meet. So don't think that you have to start really big or have to start with like so much. You just have to start where you're at. Yeah, with what you have. Yeah.
Thank you for that. So I'd like to close my show by asking my guests, before I do that, actually, lest I forget, Wawira, how can we follow you on social media? How can we support the work of Food for Education? Make sure our listeners know both those things.
Yeah, so you can support or see our work at www.food4education.org.
Okay, foodforeducation.org, and they'll find everything there.
Yes.
How to support, how to get involved.
Yes.
If you're local, there's ways to get involved. Local meaning Kenya. If you're international, there's ways to support and get involved as well. Yes. How about on social media? How can they find you?
We're food4education on everything.
On everything.
Yeah.
You've kept it very nice and simple. Well done. I'm like trying to get to that point where you are. So well done for that.
Yeah.
Okay. So as we close, I always love to hear from my guests, 2 questions. What's bringing you joy? What brings you joy? And I like to ask people what their favorite drink is, but because you're in the food space, maybe you can tell us your favorite meal, including what is the meal that Food for Education provides for kids every day.
Yeah, so what's bringing me joy? I think this year is bringing me joy. I'm very excited and a little scared, but a little more excited about the year and the plans that we have, and our team and the scale up, and also to find other things to explore other things about myself, and to continue growing as a person and as a leader. The thing that I like to, the kids, what they eat is most, it's either maize beans and vegetables, or rice beans and vegetables, or rice, lentils and vegetables. They serve fruit. So it's a more varied diet. My favorite food, actually, I'm very simple, is just ugali and sukuma wiki and beef stew.
Yeah. That really is the most Kenyan answer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so now what's your favorite beverage then? So you gave us the most Kenyan meal ever. Give us
I need to find a good beverage.
Not chai. What's your favorite beverage?
Actually not chai.
Okay.
I was gonna say chai, a masala chai, a masala tea, okay. With lactose-free milk,
with a twist.
Yes,
masala chai with a twist. I like it.
Yes.
Wawira, it's been only a pleasure to have you here. You have taught me, you have inspired me, you have moved me, and you've given us all, I think, a challenge to think about what is a need right where I am that I can do my little thing to respond. That's what Wangari Maathai taught us, right?
Yes.
Let me be a hummingbird, let me do my little thing. And you're doing that every day for 95,000 plus kids a day. Bravo. Thank you. God
Thank
bless you. Thank you
you.
so much for being on Salam and Hello.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks
so
for having
much.
me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, listeners, you've heard so much. I hope that you will follow Wawira's work and Food for Education. She's giving you all the handles, the website. There's always something that we can do wherever we are. And if you're looking for a place to get involved here in Kenya, I hope you will check out the work that they're doing. And if you're listening from abroad, check them out as well, because there's always something that we can do. And next week, we have another fantastic guest. So tune in, Salam and Hello, and we'd love to hear from you as well. So at Salam and Hello on all the social media platforms or salamandhello.com. Peace.